So, good evening, everybody. Thank you for making it to the third installment of our molecular mixture workshops. Today, we will be covering the next steps of how to get research. So we will be covering how to write a professional email, how to have a successful interview, and in the worst case scenario, how to handle rejection. So before we begin, let's meet our presenters.
So I'm Zachary Zerurigian. I'm a third-year student here, and I have 2 degrees. I am a music major and a biochemistry major, and my research interests include leukemia and epigenetics on one hand, and then also British Romantic viola repertoire from the early 20th century.
Hello, my name is Irene Singpet. I am a third-year microbiology student, and my research interest pertains to biocatalysts of archaea and their possible application to green chemistry.
And my name is Hala Hashim. I'm a second-year chemistry student, and my research interest lies in discovering the protein dynamics of GPCRs through NMR spectroscopy. So before we begin, if any of you guys have made it to our previous workshop, then you might already know what some of these words are. But for those of you who haven't made it, we're just going to cover a couple of words that might seem a little intimidating, but it will be mentioned quite often during this presentation tonight. So the first one is principal investigator, otherwise known as a PI. This is the person who runs the lab. So if the name of the group is Eddie Lab, then Eddie is the PI. This will be the person that you contact in order to inquire about research interests, and they pretty much head the lab. Next is a resume. I feel like most of you guys know what a resume is. It's just a one-page document that lists your objective, your education, extracurriculars, anything somebody needs to know about you through academic means. On the other hand, there's something called a curriculum vitae or a CV. For now, as undergraduates, you guys would have a resume and not a CV. CVs are for those academics pretty much starting through graduate school, where it takes everything from a resume, but it's much more expanded. So you could talk about publications, grants and fellowships that you've received, your education. But for now, when you guys are referring to a document that has all of your experience on it, it would be more of a resume. And lastly, you may be asked to write a cover letter. A cover letter takes information from your resume and expands it in much greater detail. So you can talk about, for example, research that you've done previously, why you specifically like this lab's research and what drew you to it, why you like science in general, and any skills you've obtained through classes or extracurriculars that you've done. Give me 1 second. So now Irene will kick it off on how to write a professional email.
Hello, so let's meet Alberta Gator. Alberta is a second-year chemistry student, and she went to Tuesday's Researching Research workshop and yesterday's Mixer and found out, wow, she's really interested in Dr. Smith's lab and wants to see if she could possibly do research. So Alberta has come to us for some help, and this is her. Was I muted the whole time? So let's just read through this real quickly. The subject reads research, and it says, Dear Mr. Smith, my name is Alberta Gator. I am a second-year student interested in joining your research lab. I find your research about environmental toxicology really fascinating. I would, however, like to learn more about your lab. Are there any positions open currently? I have taken classes such as Organic Chemistry 1, General Chemistry 1 and 2, and Introductory Biology sequence. I look forward to contacting you in the future. Thanks, Alberta Gator. So, is there anything that anyone sees that Alberta could correct?
There's not really any specific information
Exactly.
to why they're fascinated in their research.
So starting from the beginning of this email, the subject is very vague. This is Dr. Smith's lab, and she wrote Mr. Smith. That is quite a careless mistake. And like you said, the actual body is very unspecific, and she listed a bunch of classes, which we don't really understand the application right now. And if we covered Mr. Smith, quote unquote, because that's her typo, would you be able to tell this is Dr. Smith's lab? Not really, because it's really vague. And the closing and signature block could be more professional. Alberta could be presenting herself in a more professional light. So today we are gonna help give Alberta some advice. So we'll start with the basics. So from the beginning, we start with the anatomy of the email. As you all probably know, an email consists of the to field, the subject, greeting, body, closing, and signature. And following this progression, today we're gonna give Alberta some advice on how to vamp up her email. Starting with the to field, this may seem very elementary, but make sure that you type in the email correctly. You don't always get like an alert from Gmail or something that the email was not sent. And if this error occurs, your PI of choice may never receive the email you. Also, do not multiply multiple PIs at once. This is kind of like, it tests your genuinity. Like, are you really applying to this lab because you enjoy the research, or are you just applying to a bunch of labs because you just want to fill your resume? The subject line, I feel like could be a little underrated, but in this case, it's very important because Alberta's sending a cold email. So this means that Alberta has never came in contact with Dr. Smith or contacted him before. So the subject line can be the difference between Dr. Smith opening that email or just letting it go. And as we can see, a specific and more informative subject is more persuasive than Alberta's initial email of just research. Greeting and introduction. In many ways, this email is similar to having a conversation with someone for the first time. So you want to give off a good impression and a professional impression. So first, start off with dear, then appropriate title and the PI's name. And don't start with to whom it may concern or good morning. Greetings vague like that. Again, it's like that email can go to any lab, or you really didn't do your background research as to who you're talking to, for example. And then you get to introduce yourself. Who are you? Start with your name, year, major, and after your brief introduction, you can go into things like your post-undergraduate goals and research / topics that pertain to your interests. And this is a good way to kind of transition into the main bulk of the body. The body. So personally for me, the body of the email is probably the most nerve-wracking part, but no worries, because we are all going to walk through it together. In general, again, you're going to hear me harp about this on and on, but you want to showcase yourself in the most professional light or manner as possible. So key things include making sure your email is legible. Don't just send a huge mass of text. Make new paragraphs when necessary. And that means making sure your spacing is consistent if you are making these paragraphs and such. be concise. PIs are busy people and time is money. So 1, 2, 3 paragraphs will suffice. We are just trying to highlight key points, and you don't need to tell everything about yourself in the initial email, because remember, your resume and a cover letter, if you choose, will be attached to the email. So what exactly are PIs looking for? They're looking for someone who's genuinely interested in the research being conducted. And this really shows in how vague or specific your email is. Did you really read through the papers that that have been published, or did you just kind of see some keywords, throw them in because they kind of sounded good? Another thing is to show that you're a good communicator through the body of your email, because not only is being a good communicator important when finding a research position, but it's just good in general for all parts and events in life. You're gonna have to eventually communicate with other people, not just the PI who are involved, so it is important. They are also looking for someone that is highly motivated and curious. Some ways you can display this in the body of your email is, oh, you saw that this one technique was used and you're curious about learning more, even though if you don't know it. Or if you have questions, that's a great thing. You don't have to be a master of what is being researched in the lab. You are a student and you're not even part of the lab, so it's a-okay. The closing and signature. Again, show your professionalism. Use closings like sincerely, best wishes, regards. Don't just use your slash, then your name, or something like thanks. More casual emails, that might be okay, but not in this case. And then we get to the signature block. Very exciting. I like to think about the signature block as your signature, but even better. For example, let's look at Alberta's signature block. So she has her name, university, expected graduation year, major, minor, and some contact information. So a signature block is pretty cool because you can include contact information without taking up one of those paragraphs, for example, in the body. And you can also highlight something that you don't necessarily want to mention in the body of the email. For example, let's say you hold a position in a club or something. You can include that in your signature block. And even though this seems quite lengthy, there's nothing to fear because technology is pretty cool and you can make a template. Sorry, the screen wasn't changing. So UF, we use Outlook for our email. So I made this example in Outlook, but whatever email you use, the internet will have the key. So first, in the top right corner, there's the little settings cog. You click that, go all the way down, and it will say view all Outlook settings. After you click that, you would click mail, compose and reply, write out your signature block, and make sure to click automatically include my signature on new messages that I compose, and then save. And when you're making a signature block, don't feel like you're super restricted because everyone's signature block is different. Just if you want to include color, make sure they're easily legible colors and stick to maybe 1 plus the black. And also with your name, you could also make it like 2 sizes bigger than the rest of the information in the signature block. So Alberta has finished writing her email. And now what we have left is to proofread. Let's make sure that email is spick and span. So ultimately, you're finding and correcting any like grammatical errors, spelling errors, even formatting errors. And not only that, but you want to see, oh, am I persuading the reader effectively? And in this case, it's the PI. So some tips are to read the email out loud, and then save a draft and reread at another time, maybe like sleep on it. If you're in a rush, wait a couple hours and then look back. And I think the most important tip I can give you is ask for help. Ask your classmates have gone through similar things, or mentors that you have, to look over your email. If they love you, they'll give you some pretty good feedback. Like I said, asking and reaching out for help is very important. Depending on where you go, if you go to UF, there are these resources, but there are probably many different resources that you could get some feedback on your email. So at UF, there's the Career Connection Center. They have express drop-in, literally 15 minutes, and they won't only look over things like an email, but they'll also look over things like your resume or like a cover letter. The next resource is the Center for Undergraduate Research. I think this is probably the most valuable resource when it comes to writing a PI, because they have peer advising. These are undergraduates who have went through what you have went through, so they are speaking from their own personal experience. The writing SU isn't as applicable, but I think it's a good resource that is underused. So all these links in the PowerPoint, they should be clickable and direct you to the sources. And so proofreading, if you want a quick guide on how to start, I start with making sure the email and subject line are free of errors, because sometimes we just get so tunnel vision on the body. You also want to make sure you're effectively persuading the reader. The email's free of any grammatical and spelling errors. And is it legible? Aesthetics do play a role in how you come off. So IDA is an acronym that's going to help us make sure that we are conveying our message effectively. A stands for attention, I is for interest, D is for desire, and A is for action, the other A. Attention, did you engage the reader? Some ways you can do this is like stating if someone has referred you to contact this PI, or talk about some lab techniques or prior research you think might be applicable. And last but not least, you can talk about a class or two, but just make sure that there is some relevance. And remember, you are just engaging the reader. You don't have to go in a whole lot of detail because you are attaching a resume and some of you a cover letter. You just want to highlight what you think will spark interest and is applicable. Interest and desire. Did you explain your interest and show that you have done your homework, quote unquote? So when I say you have done your homework, did you research the lab in depth, went through their website, went through different papers? Some ways you can show this interest and desire in the lab is stating what about the research interests you. If you have any questions, that's great. ask. And then this ultimately comes down to being specific. Even if you know so much about the research, if you come off as super vague, like Alberta's email, it is not ideal. Okay, the last A is action. Did you ask for what you want? So one thing you can do is ask for an informational interview. And this is a meeting with the PI to learn more about the lab and its research. And this is pretty great because it shows the PI that, hey, you truly want to learn what is going on in the lab, the research being conducted, and before jumping in and starting to do anything. Another thing you can include is if there are any positions available. Ask if there are any positions available. Along with the action, make sure to state any attachments that you include in the email. For example, resume, class schedule. If you have flexibility in your schedule, that's great. Other things you can include is an unofficial transcript or cover letter. And this may sound silly, but make sure you actually attach those attachments. Okay, so this is a quick look back at Alberta's original email. Very vague, wrong title. The subject doesn't really tell you much. The body is very vague too. And the closing and could be more professional and there's no signature block. But hooray! Alberta has followed our advice, and now this is her new and improved email. So let's go over it together. The subject reads, informational interview, interest in undergraduate research. It says, Dear Dr. Smith, my name is Alberta Gator. I'm a second-year chemistry major, hoping to pursue a PhD in chemistry. I noticed that your prior research pertains to environmental toxicology. It is a field that I hope to learn about in more depth. As I am currently taking analytical chemistry, the mass spectroscopy methods used to measure the removal of PFAS from defoamed leachate versus foamed leachate are really fascinating to me. I would gladly learn these instrumental techniques. If possible, I would like an informational interview with you to learn more about the work that you do in the lab and possible undergraduate research opportunities. In this email, I have attached a copy of my resume and current class schedule. I hope to hear from you soon. Sincerely, Alberta Gator. And then her contact info. So the subject is more improved. Now we know that Alberta is actually an undergraduate student and is interested in research. And not only that, she wants to take action and have an informational interview. Alberta also fixed her typo with the title and put Dr. Smith this time. One thing is like her body is much more specified and tailored. You can tell that Alberta really did her homework, read through the papers, and one thing I would like you guys to notice is like she included a class, but she included what about the class could apply possibly. And within this same light, she was able to state that she's interested in learning these methods, showing that she's open to learn. And yes. we went through it. Again, subject, much better. We fixed the title, and now we have a formal signature block. Oh boy, Alberta has not heard back from Dr. Smith. So no worries, Alberta will just send a follow-up email. In general, it's standard to wait 1 week before sending a follow-up email. And it's important to note that some PIs will not consider someone a potential candidate without seeing a follow-up email. Do not just resend another copy of your initial email. Even though you're not sending your initial email, you do want to include a reminder of the email you sent, and that you're still interested, and just good things to keep in mind when writing a follow-up email. It's not a bad idea to make it easily responded to. For example, oh, I am available at this date. Are you available to have a informational interview at this time? And another thing is show that you're open to answering questions. So a good example is the one shown. Was a requirement needed to apply to the lab that's missing? Because you never know, there might have been like specific requirements and you just missed it for whatever reason. Like attaching an unofficial transcript. So hooray, Alberta, she not only wrote her first email to a PI, but she even sent a follow-up because she has not heard anything back. So after looking at all of this, let's go over some brief do's and do nots. Do tailor emails to each lab. Remember, specificity is key. You want to show that you're truly and genuinely interested in the lab. Be concise. Does not have to be more than 1 to 3 paragraphs. And then, of course, check for proper spelling, grammar, and formatting. Do not send mass emails. It's probably vague if it is a mass email, which is another do not. And of course, do not include any informal elements such as emojis, slangs, or exaggerated punctuation. Thank you.
Okay, so, oops. So Alberta Gator was successful in achieving her goals and trying to get this informative interview. And now we're going to talk about some interviews today. So before we do anything on the day of the interview, you have to do a lot of preparation for these interviews to ensure you could give the best image of yourself and do the best in the interview. We're going to go over some general guidelines, tips for that today. So first things first, researching the researcher. There was a talk on Tuesday. I'm sure many of you have went. If you did not get to see that Tuesday lecture, I would definitely go back and watch the recording. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So just generally speaking, just know what you're applying for. Read a lot of the papers published by the PI, follow up on some notions that you made in the email if given the opportunity, like questions. And even so, as I said before, this is very preliminary stuff. You want to do this even before emailing. Make sure you have a very firm background knowledge and ready to go when asked upon it. So with this comes understanding the research of the PI. Don't worry if you don't understand every last detail in a paper or something. These PIs are experts in a very, very niche field, usually a lot of the times. So feel free to ask questions if they're of the sorts like that. So you should still also make your best effort to understand at least the general subject of what's happening. And Google is your best friend for this. It's a very good resource to use, and it'll take you to many good places with that. So now we're going to move on to some interview specific preparation today. So just some general interview skills currently. First things first is confidence. You need to prepare this mindset prior to the interview, and it is one of the most crucial things about your interview. You can practice developing this with like mock interviews or just similar situations that demand confidence. I know there's some performing arts students here. I'm sure many of you have done science fairs, science boards of the sort. Those general situations demand the same confidence as an interview, and they're great resources to do that. And you could even simulate them in mock situations like that. Part of this confidence, though, comes from first impression. We'll get into this a little later. However, researching the background again really helps in solidifying a foundation in reciting on that. And also with that, there's confidence in not knowing. If you don't know something, don't act like you know it, because these people, especially if it's pertaining to their subject, will know it. And it's better to show humility in not knowing and just simply asking and showing interest in the field. So another just general tip is just practicing on your voice. You want to practice clear articulation at a normal pace in speaking. And when answering and responding, you usually want to give a slight pause, collect your thoughts, clearly articulate, and don't forget to smile. Smiling does miles in just speaking in general. Again, you could practice this in stimulating or in some sort of stressful environment. So this pertains to answering some of the behavioral questions. So like ADA, we have another acronym for this. In this case, it's STAR. This stands for Situation, Task, Action, and Result. This is a very powerful tool in building a problem-solving narrative that it shows competence, it shows detail in your work, and it's still concise enough to be an answer for any of these questions. So in general, the situation, it sets the scene, you give context to what's about to unfold. The task is just what happened, what did you complete, like solving a problem or making a decision. And then action, how this task was completed, and then the result, you kind of tie up the whole narrative and you end it in a positive light, like the benefits of what you learned from it or of the sorts. So just a general tip in formatting these answers. So a lot of times these questions are very generic. You can practice them beforehand. However, they should not be overly scripted at all. These still should come off as very conversational. And with this, self-awareness and honesty are huge in building a relationship with your PI during an interview and just with anyone in general. So please make them conversational. So this is just a generic example with this very generic question. Just tell me about a time you worked successfully under pressure. So just some general notes here. It's still somewhat brief. You could even be briefer with this as long as you spin the whole narrative. And then it's very articulate, very clear in what it wants to engage. So the situation here is just you had some difficulty collecting data in a cancer lab of some sort. And because of this, you were very limited on the time that you had to complete the project, the task, what you set out to do, and that's just to analyze, prepare, and plan a course of action. The action is how this was done, evident here, and then the result, you notice how it ultimately just ends it with a very positive light. It was very stressful, but ultimately a good learning experience. We'll always want to end this on a positive light. So here's some additional tips as well. Again, feel free to ask questions. The researchers love to talk as well, especially about their work. And in general, these questions can arrive in two flavors. One's positional, more pertaining to the actual position you're applying for. These could be such as like greatest challenges in the field, who am I working under, how flexible scheduling of the sorts. And then some more general questions on like research related ones. So these could be follow-up questions that you posed in the original email. These could also be, how can I learn most about this field in an efficient manner? So asking about the best resources to learn about the field. And then just some general advice from an undergraduate researcher. The PIs are very knowledgeable and they do not mind sharing some of their wisdom with you. So another additional tip, networking. I'm sure, again, many of you guys went to the networking event yesterday. Hope that was enjoyable and went well for all of you guys. Networking is huge, building relationships even before the interview process, before the email process with PIs and of the sorts, really goes miles in just getting your foot in the door and getting ready to go. So another thing, scheduling. So likewise with your resume, this is probably requested in an email or sent in an email. However, bring a physical copy of your schedule on hand and be able to very articulately convey what it is and how many hours you're willing to work. Usually you could expect to work around 10 hours. This could range from anywhere from 8 to 12. This is generally what PIs are looking for. So be sure that you're able to communicate this time effectively with the PI. So yeah, so we're gonna go on to, I believe, day of. So Alberta's ready to go. She's prepared a lot. So now what do you do of the day? So we're gonna first talk about some attire. So just as a general rule of thumb, business casual is what is expected in these interviews. And we're just gonna go over a brief list of examples on what that is. For tops, button-up collared t-shirt, or not t-shirts, my bad, just collared shirts or button-up shirts. Tie is optional with that. So if you go without a tie, I would recommend also getting a V-neck of some sort to not show the undershirt where your collar is unfolded. Other additional tops could be blouses, casual dresses, split or below the knee, and then sports coat blazers, turtlenecks, and sweaters of the sorts. I would be a little cautious about turtlenecks and sweaters because they could be perceived as a little more informal. So I would just stick to something above that personally. However, things to avoid, I know polos have collars. That doesn't make them acceptable by any means. Do not go into an interview, please, with a polo. Some more intuitive things are like printed shirts, sportswear of the sorts. So for bottoms, we're talking pencil cut, knee-length skirts, dress pants, slacks. Avoid denim, ripped jeans, leggings. And then for shoes, we're looking at flats, pumps, closed-toed kitten heels, tie-up, and dark leather shoes, loafers, dark colored socks with minimal patterns. Just general things here. And then avoid strappy sandals, boots, sneakers, ankle socks, open-toed heels. And then just some general guidelines with this. You want to stick to simpler colors or neutrals for all colorways. Your belt color should almost always match your shoe color. I would do this. It looks very nice and very professional. And then this is a note for online interviews. So fully dress in business casual. So top, bottom shoes. It really helps with keeping a professional mindset, and in the off case that you have to stand up in the interview, it's not really embarrassing and possibly detrimental to your interviews, showing that you're in sweats and a nice collared tee or something. So we just have some examples here. All these are acceptable. And just for another plug, UF, the career center that we have here, they do offer business casual, like attire of any sorts, also business formal for almost any interview possible. Many schools have these type of resources, and I would highly take advantage of them, as well as just for interview preparation and mock interviews. So we're going to go into a little more in depth on how the interviews work, what to expect, what to do. And we're going to start off with remote interviews because we're in a pandemic. This is huge now. This is what you're primarily seeing as the primary mode of interviewing. So first of all, we're just going to talk about some technology things with Zoom video, phone calls of the sorts. So first things first, use wired internet. It's accessible to some of you guys, I'm sure, but it really, really minimizes your chance for a dropped connection. If you have access to it, please use it. Even if your computer doesn't have a internet port, you can easily Amazon something for $10 or less, like a USB-A or C adapter to Ethernet, and it's very professional not to drop the call and freak out and try to finagle everything back in. So also with this in mind, some people may ask for a pre-recorded interview to just completely eliminate this chance entirely. So it's a possibility, anticipate the chance possibly. Another thing, you want to test your microphone and video settings before you start, not when you're waiting for them, or even worse, in the room with the interviewers. This again lies with how you want to prepare yourself in the most prepared manner. So another thing, smile. This goes miles, and especially a Zoom and video call in person as well. This is just a visual as well as just a psychological thing. So it aids in just showing a brighter tone of voice, actually. It's really beneficial to that. So for phone calls, again, similar topics with this, use a landline if possible. This probably isn't as likely to be accessible. I know a lot of people have eliminated landlines now. You have access to it, great, use it. And then again, smiling. In this setting, it's more psychological, but it really helps nonetheless. So some more things with technology and whatnot. You want a distraction-free environment. If you want to find a place that you're very comfortable in, free of disturbances. If you have roommates, make sure to tell every last one of them you have a very important interview with a research position possibly, and either try to eliminate the noise as much as possible in your room or just find a new location altogether that would be suitable for that. Again, with this, we're going to talk about backgrounds a little bit. So anything that Hala has, Irene has, they're perfect. They're just enough to be stimulating, but they're not like too overt or too complex. There's not things moving. You just generally want to have some life, some background, ambiance. So when you get into the call, make sure you introduce yourself before asking for the person you are calling. This is just general professionalism. And again, in the same vein, let the interviewer end the call. So this is, as much as it is professional as well, this also ensures that there are no final questions being asked by the interviewer or interviewers. We'll get into that a little bit too. So again, upbeat tone, don't sound drab. Energy, enthusiasm goes miles in making a great first impression. So we're going to talk about a little bit of stuff that pertains more to in-person interviews as well, but these are still very applicable in the online setting. So for one-on-ones and panels, first of all, you want to establish your fit in the environment. So when you get there, feel the atmosphere of the room, gauge interaction between yourself and the interviewers. You want to make sure you greet everyone in the room. You should be prompting this, not them. And in a pre and post-pandemic circumstance, you would be greeting with a handshake. You may show some sort of gestural thing as well as a verbal thing, but you will likely not be having a handshake or whatnot now. So another thing is eye contact. This is huge. So for panels specifically, you want to begin and end eye contact with the interviewer that prompted the question. And at the same time, you still want to disperse your eye contact throughout the panel, throughout everyone about equally, but you still want to begin and end with the person that asked the question. So active engagement is also huge. These are just simple head nods, words of acknowledgement. It shows that there's, even if you're not speaking, it shows some sort of dialogue or acknowledgement that you're still with the conversation, you're still on top of it, ready to go. And then once it's done, you want to thank everyone in the room for their time. They took time out of their day to interview you personally, and it's just a great thing. So for group interviews, this is also a possibility that I've heard in some labs. Again, you want to establish your fit in the environment or group, you want to engage how the environment flows and whatnot. So with active listening and participation, you want to ask questions, participate in conversation, offer advice, go with the ebb and flow of what's happening in the room. However, you should never be leading the discussion. You simply engage in it. So we're going to talk about impressions a little bit. So, as I was saying earlier, first and general impressions, they're both huge, especially the first impression. Interviewers can often make an impression of you just within seconds of seeing you for the first time. This is very important to get started on a very good note as soon as you walk in the door. Some tips for this. So we want to always arrive early, in person or online. You should be at least like 10, 15 minutes ready to go on your Zoom call, or if you're in person, you want to make sure you're there at least 10, 15 minutes before your time. You want to prepare for this in your route there, however you commute there. You want to account for this ahead of time. So you also want to appear ready to work. You want to be well presented, have your notepad, paper ready to take notes, and bring any requested materials that they have requested you to. So for professional greetings, we'll always use the last names of the individuals unless you are told to use their first name. Some people do prefer this, and you will see this. And again, you would be doing a firm handshake in ideal circumstances as well with this. So respect and courtesy to all. This is a huge bit that some people might overlook. So even if it's not the interviewer, it is important to treat everyone that you interact with at the site or anyone even related to this all the exact same way as you would the interviewer. This shows miles on your character and how you are able to work with people. So you should be also prepared for any conversation or interaction in general. And you just go about this by staying up to date on some current events in the news, like what's happening cool in the field of research that they are in, or just cool in science, design, or general, or just general conversation, things like weather or sports, if you guys are into that. Just whatever, just general things to keep a conversation flowing, something simple. And then even with this, you still want to be listening more than talking. So everything went well in your interview. Now what? It is after the interview, and most important thing you guys can do is write a thank you message of some sort. This is huge. You should already have a contact information for your PI or any of the interviewers present. You should be thanking every single one of them, and they should be sent within 24 hours of the interview. So these should be always personalized, always, always, always. Recall in your notes about something you latched onto, like a shared interest. It could be anything from having a shared interest in the field or something specific with that. Or if you guys both like opera, had a little conversation about that or something you guys still connected on, it's still very personal. So along with this, you should be including 1 or 2 key points that you want to personally put in there and leave an impression of. And you could go about this 1 of 2 ways, handwritten or email. As a contact precaution, handwritten notes are probably not the move right now. However, in a post-pandemic world, this is a very, very, very nice option as well. These come off as more sincere, but keep in mind their longer turnaround time. Emails can also be longer, especially if follow-up information is requested and needed. It's very easy to just attach this onto an email. It is preferable. When you do a handwritten note, it should always be short. So with all that in mind, we're going to pass it off to Hala for how to handle rejection.
Okay, everybody. So let's say in an ideal world, you did everything that we told you today, and you somehow still got rejected. That is okay. This does happen. And you have to realize you really shouldn't take it personally if you get a rejection letter or email, in this case, from a PI. A lot of things go into making a decision on whether or not to accept a new lab member. For example, groups might not have space. Currently, my lab has about 12 to 13 people. And for each person, the PI has to allocate a certain amount of space in the lab, time for meetings, and money for reagents and all that jazz. And it might not be, and they're only allotted a certain amount of money each year. So they might not have the space or the funds to bring somebody else on. Another thing is you might not necessarily have the skills that they require. Zach mentioned in the beginning that a lot of labs kind of have niche research interests, and you might not necessarily have the skills that they require. So if you're a freshman who have maybe only taken, general chemistry labs, so you know a little bit about your ways around the lab, you might need more depending on the lab that you reach out to. But that is okay. Rejection does happen. I know a lot of freshmen are coming out of college admissions, and you might have not gotten to every school that you wanted to. So where you have to go from here is just sharpening your skills. And the best way to do that is through self-assessment. And we'll talk about that in a later slide. You can sharpen the areas that you're kind of lacking in multiple avenues. So the first is gaining more experience. You can do this by either joining another lab. It's very common for people to go to one lab, do some time there, and then switch to the lab that they initially wanted to, or by taking some lab classes or other science classes. The next thing is reformatting your resume and your cover letter. This is just really helpful when you get advice from other people saying, well, you maybe didn't convey the classes that you took in the best manner. So I would kind of refurbish that. And the last thing that you can do is also practicing your interview skills. You guys will do a lot of interviews, whether it be for programs, for research positions, for clubs. And the more interviews you do, the more accustomed you come to it. At this point, a lot of the upperclassmen are not afraid of interviews because it becomes more of a conversation. So I promise you, it does get a lot easier. And you can get advice from a lot of different people. And it might seem kind of scary to do so, but getting advice from the person who rejected you is actually very helpful. And this is because they're the ones who looked through your materials. They were the ones who sat down with you for the interview. So they know the areas that you were lacking in. So it would be really helpful if you reach out to them, and we'll show you how to do that later. But once if you get rejected, don't just stop after one rejection. You have to reach out to other labs. This personally happened to me. I decided to reach out to a biomedical engineering lab summer going into my first year, and I got rejected. Looking back on the email that I wrote and the cover letter and the resume and everything that I submitted to them, I understand the reason why. But later on in fall of my freshman year, I found the group and I've been working with them ever since, and I absolutely love it. So I promise you, at the end of the day, you will find the lab that fits you best. So self-assessment. This is imperative to do once, if you do get a rejection, because there was something that just didn't work. So we highly recommend to revisit the actions. So did you give off a good first impression? So when people greeted you, you greeted them back. Your behavior, so did you have proper posture? Believe it or not, posture is a very big thing that people look at. So if you're slouching and your shoulders are hunched, it gives off a different impression when your shoulders are upright and everything looks good. Also, did you maintain proper eye contact? So if they're talking to you over Zoom, are you looking straight into the camera, or are you looking off to the side, or are you looking down? It does make a big difference because it shows that you're not really paying attention to them and you kind of don't care. And also, did you check your phone while you were with them? I know that our phones are constantly next to us, so you might get a text message from your mom or from your best friend. When you're interviewing, it is not the time for that. And also think back to the responses that you gave when you were conducting your interview. So were they answered in detail? So if the PI asks you, so tell me, what are your research interests? I like research, yeah, it's cool. That really tells you nothing. And that kind of shows, well, they didn't really put much effort. And another thing is, were your responses appropriate? So if they asked you, what classes have you taken that would work really well for us fitting in this lab? I really like Chem Club. Chem Club is great. I highly recommend you go to a meeting once or twice. Again, not an appropriate response. And this might seem, well, okay, this is just for the interview, but like this has no place in me working in their lab. It really does, because you yourself are not a resume, you're not a cover letter, you're not any grades from any specific class, you're a person. And you're a person that's going to be working directly with the PI, you're going to be working with graduate students, you're going to be working with undergraduates in the lab. And they want to see that you are a person and that you can communicate efficiently. So if you can be the best scientist in the world and they tell you, awesome, the experiment that you just did, I want you to relay that protocol to your desk mate. And if you're not able to properly, communicate that to them and their experiment fails and they wasted time and money, the PI is really not going to like that. So they want to see that, okay, they can communicate responsibly, they can, and they look good while they're doing it. So now you think, okay, well, I'm thinking back to everything that I did, but how does that really help? Rating yourself on the aforementioned qualities as the place of the interviewer. So imagine, you are the interviewer and somebody gives you the responses that you gave them. It's like, okay, well, I did say that. Maybe give myself like a 4 for that. Okay, great. I don't really think maybe a 4 out of 5. I don't really think I would need to, redo anything if I was asked this question again. And then you think, but I did look down the entire time while I said it. So I think that kind of drops it down to a 3. And I mumbled the entire time. So I give myself a 2. So thinking back and kind of rating yourself is going to be really helpful when you have to do this again. But we are our biggest critics at the end of the day. So be objective and not overly critical. Don't knock yourself down if you stuttered once, if you maybe skipped over a word or two. It's fine. They understand that. And you're not necessarily born with innate interview skills or how to write a resume. Everybody in the Chem Club eBoard knows I was stressing over writing my resume like a couple of weeks ago. And I've written like tens of thousands. I've written just a lot of resumes at this point, and I'm still stressing over it now. But you have these skills and you can always improve them. So don't knock yourself down if you had one bad interview or if one resume didn't look good. So some do's and do nots. Do send a thank you note. As Zach mentioned before, you send a thank you note to thank them for taking time out of their day to meet with you. These PIs are not just running a lab, they're also professors. So imagine that they have duties for classes on top of maintaining their lab, writing grants, all these things. So you have to send a thank you note for them taking time to sit down with an interview for you. But you should also thank them for whatever, if they accept you, if they reject you. Because at the end of the day, they did take time to consider your application holistically and how you'd fit in their lab. So if you send a thank you note for them accepting you, you should also send a thank you note if they do reject you. And as I previously mentioned, ask them in your thank you letter or email, what can I do to improve myself? Was it because of my resume? Was it because of what I said during the interview? It might seem scary, but I promise you that, they're more than willing to share advice because they do want to see you succeed in some capacity. And do feel free to send updates to them every once in a while. I will put a little asterisk on that. We will get to that in 1 second. But jumping to the do nots, don't let one rejection get you down. You won't go any farther if you just stop after being rejected once. Don't send the same resume and cover letter to them at a later time or to any other PIs in general. There's always something to improve on. So you want to show progress that, okay, I realized a mistake, let me fix it and let me do it again. And the last thing is don't fill their inboxes with every little thing. So that's where that little asterisk comes in. It's great to send them an update every couple of months, maybe at the end of the semester, being like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I have taken this class and I've taken that class. I've learned these skills. That's great. That's awesome. But don't send them an email being like, hey, I got an A in my Orgo exam. Can you let me in your lab now? I promise you that doesn't look good. And keep in mind that their inboxes are filled to the brim, and sending them little updates, constantly only adds to that. And they don't really like that. So the last thing is a thank you letter example. So this is from Alberta. Sadly, she didn't get into this one's Buckminster's lab. But she said, good afternoon, Dr. Buckminster. I would like to thank you for taking time to review my application / to sit down with an interview. If you have the time, I would appreciate advice on how to make my application more competitive for the future. Was it due to the formatting of my resume and cover letter, its content, or something else? Also, please keep me in mind if there are any open spots in the future. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, Alberta Gator. So first, Alberta thanks them for their time and their consideration, something that you guys should be doing. If you do have to write a thank you letter in this capacity, she's asking for advice on how to make herself more competitive for the future, and maybe giving examples as like hinting to what it may have been about. and also asking to keep them in mind for the future. So labs might not have space at that time, so there might just be way too many people. But people graduate, people move on to other labs. So asking them to keep you in mind for the future, they'll think, well, Alberta did have a really good application, so let me reach out to her. And I promise you, things like that do happen. So this is just a good example to go to if you do have to write this letter at some point. And that is all we have for you guys tonight. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat.
I think Ian had a question a while ago, and I think we said we'd take it at the end. Try to find it.
Let's see.
Okay.
How do you get to know / talk to your professor on a more personal / informal level? Feel incredibly stiff and robotic when I'm talking to them about science. I mean, I could take this. It's just, you have to realize they're normal people. Yeah, they have, amazing CVs where they've researched at the Scripps Institute. They get grants from like the National Science Institute or Foundation, sorry. But they're real people and they really like talking about the stuff that they do. So just, maybe popping into office hours or just being like, hey, like I took your class at some point. I would love to get to talk to you more about it. I promise you, like they will love the opportunity to just sit down and talk.
If I could expand on that a little bit, Catherine touched on it a little bit with like latching onto things that you see in yourself and just going from there. But again, with being observant in your environment and whatnot, a lot of times, especially in person, you'll get to see their office. Sometimes you could see some things in their room. Like I know I was going to talk to one of the Orgo 2 professors in the chem school, and he had some guitars lying around. So I was like, so you're a musician as well? And it was a talking point for probably like 5-10 minutes, honestly. Just simple little things, noticing some little things and then just taking it for a ride. Again, professors love to talk as well. So again, a lot of dialogue will also probably just be from them talking to you rather than conversely. But I hope any of that helped you out.
Yeah, that's good concrete stuff. So also when they ask me like really open-ended vague questions like tell me about yourself or like who are you as a person, I'm not really that great at describing myself in storytelling terms. Like usually it's like, oh, I did these things,
Yeah.
not like who am I?
Yeah, so I could take that again. So again, these are very generic questions. These are behavioral-ish. These are very generic. As expected, you could prepare for them. I would do a little bit preparing for this and then just integrate some conversational skills with that. Just, I wouldn't say think of them as a friend per se, but have that mentality of your just conversation flowing as if you were talking to a friend, but keeping in a very professional light and in a rehearsed manner still, but make sure it comes off as conversational. Does that help at all?
Kind of.
I can jump on this a bit. You can look up, and like there are many sources on this, general interview questions. And if you just take a couple minutes just to sit down and like write a couple things that relate to that, and just kind of have like little bullet points, don't make a whole script. Like Zach said, scripted responses do stand out as something that's kind of off-putting. So if you just, a couple bullet points and just like practice in the mirror, I promise you it goes a really long way.
What you could also do with really like kind of big picture questions like that, think a little more about who you want to be instead of who you are. Like obviously be realistic, but you could talk about some of your future or goals more, and your passions rather than technical things that you think will sell you as a candidate.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, another thing with that, don't also like limit your mind in just science, since this person's a very science person, especially if you're describing who you are. Really capture who you are. It doesn't have to be related to science if it shows character and it shows relevance of who you are. Just make sure don't limit yourself to that.
Do you have any examples of like personal anecdotes that you could tell that would illustrate character?
I guess I could first take that. So as I said before, I'm not just a biochem and STEM oriented person. I do a lot of music, and this really stands out, especially when talking to people that I haven't know. They run a class or are PIs or whatnot. And can you repeat your question? I was just kind of going on.
So like a personal anecdote that illustrates your character.
Yeah, so I usually expand on music a lot because while music is a subject in itself, it shows a lot of character traits such as perseverance, a lot of hard work, self-discipline. So generally, you just want to like talk about, it's similar to a star type of thing. You want to talk about something and then elaborate on what makes it crucial to who you are, how it does, and to end it in a positive light and just summarize with that.
You could also bring up any sort of volunteering things you've done in the past, because that goes a lot towards showing what's important to you. So if you, or like extracurriculars like that, because all of those things do add up to show who you are.
I mean, to bounce off Rebecca's point, when I was sitting down in the interview with my PI, he saw that I did Chem Club outreach. I was one of the chairs at the time. And he was like, whoa, that's really interesting because I used to do that. And we had like a 20-minute conversation just about outreach and like different kinds of experiments that we've done. And it really goes a long way because they just see you as a person.
Paula, we got a question in the chat asking, what is Chem Club outreach?
Well, thank you, Lauren, for asking that question. Chem Club Outreach is a program from UF Chem Club where we send volunteers to local elementary schools around Alachua County, and they do little oak science experiments from it's like first grade to fifth grade. We do a couple middle schools, sometimes high school, but it's a really great program for anyone who wants to kind of get involved with just volunteering and just wanting to like spread the love of science. Love you too, Lauren. Alex asking, after going to the networking event last night, how do I find who PI for a professor's lab group is? Wait, Alec, can you unmute yourself and reiterate that, please?
Yeah, sorry. I was just asking, I think I'm getting confused between PI versus professor, because if last night I was in the like the chemistry session, and it was just a bunch of professors there. So, and you guys were talking about emailing the PI. So I was wondering, are they the same? Are they synonymous, or who's the PI? How do I find them?
It's synonymous, yeah. PIs, so principal investigators, are professors here. So it just depends. And like if you're in a classroom, you call them professor. If you're in your lab, you call them your PI.
Well,
Okay.
almost all the time.
Hmm.
Sometimes there are like associate professors. I know there was one in my lab, and they weren't the PI, but they were still professors. Sometimes lecturers run classes, so not necessarily, but a lot of times what Hollis said.
Do you have any more questions?
So
Oh,
I
no.
have another question if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So when you're in an in-person interview, how do you loosen up your body language? Because I usually like stand at attention, or I'm like really stiff in my seat. And like I find that people pay attention more when you're moving your hands and not really I don't know.
I can take it again if you want. So this is very difficult. I wish I had a better answer for that, but it is very difficult to naturally feel accustomed to stressful situations. You have to just really practice it a lot. Do as many mock interviews or mock situations where it stimulates stress, and just keep this in mind, channel that energy to working out how I can loosen up or somehow. It's really, really difficult. And I would say that's probably the hardest thing about an interview is maintaining your cool and just very professional, very relaxed. So just simply practice the stressful situations.
I think also sometimes as interviewees, we have the tendency to think that it's like all or nothing. And like that this is the most important moment and that we'll feel really bad if it doesn't go the way that we want it to. But just kind of remind yourself that there are a bunch of opportunities, and this is just one of them. And like try not to get super anxious beforehand and just kind of do things to calm yourself down. And then just keep it in your mind that these are people too. That like yes, they could be your boss, but also like they're not big scary monsters. Like they're people who are just looking to have a conversation with you.
Also, I think if you feel yourself tensing up, try to drop your shoulders a little bit. That physical motion is kind of not relaxing, but less tense.
Funny that you mentioned tension and stuff and whatnot. A lot of the semester in music, we were talking a lot about that. And there's things called Alexander technique. You could look it up. It's just methods of just eliminating body tension. And you keep this in mind just throughout your daily life. It does miles on your posture as well as just relaxing in stressful environments.
Also, controlling your breathing goes a long way too. I like the square breathing, so you draw square as you breathe. So it's 4 seconds breathing in, 4 seconds holding, 4 seconds breathing out, and then holding again. Then you just restart.
Something on a similar note, I want to talk about Annika's question. It's okay. A lot of people might not have, the opportunity to do interviews. And even if your brain goes empty, PIs they're okay. They understand that, this is stressful. So just doing some practices. So just talking to yourself in the mirror, having like mock interviews at the Career Center has loads of opportunities to do that. So it's okay if this seems like something that's really scary at like the start, but I promise you, even when you're in the middle of the interview, you're going to find yourself so relaxed and just like having a chat with them.
I think also how intimidating an interview can really depend on the PI. Like there are some PIs who are like gruffled men who are just like wearing suits and stuff, but you also have ones that are like wearing t-shirts and they're just like, hey, yeah, let's talk, let's chat. They don't come with questions prepared. So depending on kind of the vibe of the lab and of the PI, your experience is going to be really different.
So we got a couple questions in chat, one from Annika, hope I'm saying that right, and then Alec. So Annika says, would you say that being less adjusted to stressful situations / interviews would eliminate an otherwise good candidate? My brain just goes empty in these type of situations. So I wouldn't say necessarily it's harmful to, in speaking like elimination as a good candidate. If you're a good candidate and you've spoke why you're a good candidate, it's not necessarily going to ding you at all because you've already shown you're a very capable individual. However, on that note, I would say if you're prepared to meet these stressful situations and you practice being in these stressful situations in these less adjusted situations, it would be beneficial to your interview, but it's not usually deal breaking. Again, they're people too. They know this is very, very stressful. They were likely in your position at one point one day, as well as just they had to apply to become a PI at the university that we attend. So they also had to go through the same exact process. So they're expecting some nerves, some stress. So I wouldn't say it would Sorry. I wouldn't say it would eliminate you though.
To answer Alex's questions, Alberta's email was fine. It was one paragraph, but if you go back, think about Ida, the acronym. She was able to persuade the PI with the content in her email, even though it was brief.
Any more questions?
We could talk about this all night.
Yeah, I don't have anything to do. So,
We also can answer questions that aren't specifically about reaching out to professors, but about like any step of the process of getting research, if you guys have any lingering questions about those.
It's okay, guys, don't worry.
and if you have any further questions, I'm sure you could reach out to the UF Chem Club email or something of the sorts, and they'd be happy to take your questions if it just slips your mind here and you want to still ask it. Yeah, there's the plug.
Mm-hmm.